Hello, friends. It's the best time of the year. Today we're talking about my best books of 2023. We have quite the list to get into, and quite a few honorable mentions because it was actually really difficult to narrow it down this year. I've read a lot of good books, but after I knew what the #1 slot would be, it was very hard. So that being said, other than the top slot, the rest 9 through 10, 2 through 10, are in no particular order. Only the top one really is. So first, let's get into some honorable mentions. Books that I really loved this year, but didn't quite get a spot in the top 10. Let's talk about those first. The first book I want to mention is actually The Crane Husband by Kelly Barnhill. This is a really short book, like 118 pages or something like that. And I read it for the vlog where I was giving authors a second chance because I hadn't previously liked a book that I've read by her. And so I picked this one and I was absolutely amazed at how much I loved the story, felt for the characters in such a short amount of time. This is a book that takes place in like a normal life setting but has magical realism woven in. But the themes and conversations that took place in this book were talked about with such nuance and such beautiful prose that I couldn't really believe it. I loved this book. Next, I want to mention 2 thrillers because I didn't read a ton of thrillers this year, but I do feel like I'm kind of hard to please with them. But these 2 were either 4.5 or 5 stars. I don't remember them enough to give them a spot in the top 10, but my 2 favorite thrillers of the year definitely were None of This Is True by Lisa Joules, as well as The Chalk Man by CJ Tudor. The Chalk Man actually was featured in that video as well as giving authors a second chance, and None of This Is True I got early as an ARC and I could not put either of these down. None of This Is True made me feel really gross and like unsettled the entire time, but like in the best way. Like I was so intrigued every single page. And then Chalk Man was kind of the same exact thing, except it was more like suspense and less like gritty feeling. This book made me fall in love with CJ Tudor's writing, and I cannot wait to read more from that author. Then a romance as an honorable mention is definitely going to be The Fine Print by Lauren Asher. I freaking loved this book. This is the first in a romance trilogy, and I liked the second and the third ones okay, but nothing will compare to this first one for me. Like, I ate this up. This is basically surrounding the idea that there is this place called Dreamland. It's basically Disney World, and the man that's like sort of like Walt Disney, you know, he passes away, and in his will, he leaves sort of like equal shares to his 3 grandsons, and each book is following a different grandson, but they each have to complete a specific task in order to get their share of the company, and if one of them doesn't, then all of them will not get their share of the company, and it will go to their dad, who we don't like. This one is following Rowan and Zara, and I truly could not have loved it more. Going into this book, I really didn't expect anything because just me, who I am, reading a book called Dreamland Billionaires, I was expecting nothing. It's not the type of book that I typically read. So when I started reading it and realized that I was 150 pages in and I felt like I had only blinked, I was like, oh, this is great. So this is for sure 5 stars and deserved to be mentioned in my reading year. Another romance on this list is Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez. The thing I remember most about this book is that every single character that got named on page had a purpose to be there. I cared about every single person that showed up. The plot was absolutely perfect, but the #1 thing was that this writing is absolutely phenomenal. I, 1, couldn't put it down, and when I wasn't reading it, could not think about anything else other than finishing it. And 2, the way that the heartbreak portion of the book was written, it was so visceral that I remember pausing the audiobook on my way home from work because I had to sit with what I was feeling for about 5 minutes before I went inside. And if you know me, you know I love a kind of like hard-hitting romance, and even though there was a lot of happy times in here, the hard parts were written just as good, and I really appreciated that about it. Okay, now we have 3 fantasy honorable mentions. The first one, like, I don't understand why people don't really like this one, but it is Elantris by Brandon Sanderson. Ever since I read this book in whatever month it was, I haven't stopped thinking about it. I think the only reason it's not making a place on the top 10 is because I know that the pacing could have been a little bit better. I know it's one of his very early works, but this world and the story, the magic system, all of the characters, like everything is so fun and interesting. And I quite honestly find myself thinking about it every few days. So like maybe it could be in the top 10, but it is very close to being there. I love this book. Then Then we have Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. This is another honorable mention that I read recently. This is the first in a duology, and I truly just think that the idea around this book is one of the coolest ever. Typically, when you see a book that involves like gods and a war, the gods aren't like actually in play. They're more of like a sort of abstract idea, and the main characters or the people in the story are fighting for the god, the abstract idea of some powerful force. The gods are literally in play in this book within this like war amongst gods. And our main characters are rival journalists trying to write what's really going on because there's a lot of misinformation and filtered information being spread around. So they're trying to sort of like warn their hometown, warn the world of what's really going on. The writing in here is absolutely stunning. My only problem with it is that it's pitched as enemies to lovers, but it's really, it's just like, it's rivals to lovers. It's like divine rivals, you know, it's in the title, but it's pitched and marketed as enemies to lovers. And I mean, little soapbox is like, don't tell me it's enemies to lovers unless they're literally having their knives at each other's throats. Like, I want them to actually hate and loathe each other. Like that's not what this is. Not that it has to be that every single time, but like, I would love if it were. Other than that little thing that just like, I can't emotionally get past, this book is great. So atmospheric, and I really did love it. We have the last honorable mention, which is Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. The reason that this isn't in my top 10 is because you'll see another book in my most disappointing of the year, which really is upsetting, which kind of retroactively made me think differently about this book just a little bit, but I still wanted to mention it because I had the best time reading this. I had the time of my life. It was so much fun, so action-packed. This world is really interesting. I love a lot of the characters and how the storyline progressed in this book. So it didn't quite make it in my top 10, but I still did really, really love my experience reading this book. So I wanted to mention it for sure. Okay, we're in the top 10. So we're gonna start at number 10, but remember 10 through 2 isn't really in a specific order, but my number 1 spot is very perfectly curated, all right? So number 10, we will just go with what's on top here, and it is The Unmaking of June Farrow by Adrienne Young. This is the second year in a row that an Adrienne Young book is making its way on this top 10 list, and I almost didn't put it here. I actually started talking about it as a honorable mention, but then I realized that I did absolutely love this, so I actually swapped it with a different book that I already mentioned. So this book, I think, is in my top 10. Like I said, it's been difficult to determine. This story is centered around the women of the Farrow family, who are known to have this like centuries old curse where once they grow older, they start to unravel and basically lose their minds. And our main character is June Farrow, and it's called The Unmaking of June Farrow, which is sort of telling of her growing up and starting to unravel a little bit. But this curse is actually way deeper than surface level. There's a lot going on, and our main character June is determined to break this centuries old curse. Mostly, this book made it on the top 10 because it made me cry 4 times. 2 of those times I actually had tears going down my face. And the emotions that I felt weren't about any like plot twists or any really thing like that happened. Mostly it was just like really sweet, heartfelt moments between certain situations that were unfolding within the main character's life. And I'm being vague. This book plays with time travel, and even though that is a little bit confusing at times because time travel is not an exact type of magic, it's sort of like presented and you just have to accept it, because if you try to understand it at least for me, if I try to understand it too closely, I just have more questions than what I know what to do with. So as long as I was able to just accept that time travel was a thing and the rules within the time travel were what they were, I just, you know, I let it go and I just accepted, and I had a phenomenal time. Absolutely stunning. The writing is what really did it for me. Next, we have Bookshops and Bone Dust by Travis Baldree. Legends and Lattes was on last year. This is another repeat author, and for really good reason. I adore Travis Baldree's writing. I love his world, his characters. This is the prequel to Legends and Lattes, where our main character is a orc named Viv, and she gets hurt, and I think she like breaks her leg while she's running with the Rockham's Ravens, the mercenary crew that she works with. And she has to rest and recover within this little like seaside town named Merk, where she starts to live a slower life for a little bit, discovers her love for reading. Of course, there's like delicious pastries and amazing cute little characters, while also having a little bit of danger because there is a necromancer involved as well. This book was the perfect amount of stakes. It was the perfect amount of atmosphere and cozy feelings. I just adore these. I adore them, and I have nothing else to say. Next, we have If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio. This story centers around 7 young Shakespearean actors studying at the Delacour Classical Conservatory. These students have been studying together, they're in their 4th and final year, and one night tensions get too high during a party and they wake up and one of their friends is dead, and no one really knows what happened. But one of the boys end up going to jail for it, and this story follows many years later when he's getting out of jail, and the cop that headed that investigation is waiting for him when he comes out and is just asking him like, hey, I'm retiring, I just want to know what happened. So this is sort of a retroactive telling, dual timeline, because we do jump into the present day when he is getting out of prison, but we're learning what actually happened during those couple days surrounding the accident. And it's so good. I've never read anything Shakespeare before reading this book. I wish I had, but you definitely don't need it in order to enjoy the book. The writing is a little bit pretentious, and it was my favorite part of the story for sure. The main characters are Shakespearean actors, so they would slip in and out of Shakespeare lines within the dialogue, which was super fun. And the way that it was written, it would sometimes go like a playwright if there was like a long conversation happening, and it was awesome. It was so fun, really fun for my brain, and the last like 50 or 75 pages really made this book a 5-star read for me because it was just like twist after twist, and I think of this book so fondly. Next, we have Black Cake by Charmaine Wilkerson. This book follows our 2 main characters, Benny and Byron, whose mother, Eleanor, has passed away and left them a video will. Benny and Byron are sort of estranged, they don't talk that much, but they got together to watch this will, and during this video, they not only learn some of Eleanor's last wishes, but they also learn about a lot of secrets that Eleanor had never told her children, which can and will change the trajectory of the rest of their lives. This book is told in a dual timeline where we're in the present day following either Byron or Benny and their present day lives after learning some of the information, while also following Eleanor growing up and the trajectory of her life, which led to the decisions that she had made. I really like a dual timeline story because it really makes me want to keep reading and get back to the other perspective. Sometimes with dual timelines, you care about one more than the other, but this book did not fall victim to that. I wanted to know equally about both the present and the past timeline, and it was just so good. All of the conversations that got brought up, this was a book that I shared a lot of my favorite quotes from within a long review post on my Patreon because it was really powerful. I love this book and I think of it really fondly. Next, we have We Spread by Ian Reid. This book I read back in January, and I remember knowing in January that this would be on my top 10 books of the year, and it for sure still is. This is a like psychological horror book that plays with memory, dementia, and time. All of those things which are very scary to me. Our main character has had one too many falls back at home after her lifelong partner has passed away. And little did she know, after he had passed, he set up a place for her to go with this like care facility after she could no longer care for herself. So this is the story of our main character, Penny, going to live in this memory care facility, like a nursing home basically. And she is our narrator, so she's a little bit unreliable because she's struggling with dementia, old age, and it is such a trip of a book. I read the last like 15 pages again before I filmed this video just to remind myself of how I felt about this book because I read it so long ago, and I was just reminded at how much I loved how the story was written, where the formatting took up a lot of space on each page, and sometimes the page even only had a couple words on it, and it was just a really quick read where you just keep going deeper and deeper into the rabbit hole, where you're unsure of what's really going on, but it's also so powerful at the same time. It was such an easy 5 out of 5. Next, we have the romance that made its way on this top 10, and it is You Made a Fool of Death with Your Beauty by Akwaeke Emezi. This book made me sob uncontrollably. Though I do remember really enjoying the romance, which was surprising to me because it is an age gap romance, which I have never read before, and I don't know if it's something that I necessarily will seek out even after loving this book. This book still deserves a space in the top 10 because of just how memorable and how viscerally it affected me. I've never felt more seen in terms of the conversation of grief than I had while reading this book. Our main character lost, I don't remember if they were actually married or if they were engaged or just been together a long time, but she lost her significant other and she's kind of just going through the motions. But she is in the beginning of this book, years and years later, realizing that she should try to get back out there, and thus begins her adventure to a distant island with an opportunity to show her art because she's an artist. And she goes with a new man that she meets but ends up falling for his dad. I'm the type of person that if I'm sad, I can only listen to sad music. So if I struggle with something like grief, I love reading about about it because it's like it's the same thing. Even though it makes you more sad, it's sort of healing in that sense as well. That's what this book did for me. I feel like crying just thinking about it. Like, I'm just so glad that I read this book. On the other hand, a really happy one that's on this list is Trust of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson. This book makes me happy just thinking about it. It's following our main character Tress, who lives on this sort of like rock island, and she falls in love with the Duke's son, but the Duke is not having it. He will have no part in his son falling in love with this lowly girl. So he sends his son off to sea and he doesn't return. Tress then goes on a big pirate adventure trying to find Charlie, the Duke's son, sailing amongst the Spore Sea. This book has found family, it has danger, it has whimsy, it has humor. This book is really funny. I absolutely loved the magic system within this story. I thought it was so original, and the images that Brandon Sanderson was able to like paint with his words were so beautiful. I think so highly of this book, and it makes me happy every single time I think about it. Okay, 3 more. You ready? Next, we have Fragile Threads of Power by V.E. Schwab. This is book 1 in a new series from V.E. Schwab, taking place in the same world as A Darker Shade of Magic. You really should read the first trilogy before you jump into this one. I don't think you absolutely have to, but you probably should, because there are spoilers in this book for that series. We have a lot of the same main characters as the first trilogy, as well as a lot of new point of views, which was so much fun to read about and brought so much more to the world. This was one book this year that I was reading and just literally did not want it to end because I was enjoying every single page. I think that V.E. Schwab is just getting better with every single book that she writes, and I can't wait. I can't wait for her to write even more. I loved this book so much. The next book on my top 10 of the year is Piranesi by Susanna Clark. This was my first book of the year. Imagine reading one of your favorite books of the year with the very first one that you choose. That's what happened here. This was a book that entranced me so much that I quite literally had to drag my eyes up off the page and look around my living room to make sure that I wasn't in this house with these lapping waves crawling up these staircases in these vast hallways and corridors with statues that are different from every single other one. Like, this magical world and house was so stunning. So that being said, obviously the writing was one of my favorites ever. I truly felt like I was there with Piranesi exploring this vast house that he lives in for the other main character whose name was The Other. The Other's purpose was he was trying to find the great and secret knowledge surrounding this vast house where the story takes place in. And Piranesi had offered to help and explore, but as he's doing so, he's starting to uncover a great sinister sort of mystery surrounding the house. And it's just so good. It is so good and beautiful. I'm so happy that it actually ended up on this top 10 of the year as well. I've thought about this book so much throughout the year. Okay, quick battery change before I tell you my top book of the year. Okay, so my favorite books of the year, and I say plural books because I wasn't gonna choose just one. If you've been here for longer than a minute, you probably know what I'm about to say. And that's because this year I found the book series that is my new personality. And that, friends, is the Faithful and the Fallen series by John Gwynne. I read Malice sometime last year, but continued and finished the series this year with Valor, Ruin, and Wrath. Quite literally every single book in this series was a 5-star read for me, and I'm not holding up all 4 of these while we talk, so I'll just hold the first one because this is the one that you would have to start with in order to have the best reading experience of your life. If you are someone that loves a high fantasy war story with a lot of political intrigue and like the vibes of Skyrim, this really could be the perfect series for you. The character lists get longer and longer as you continue on in the series, so you really do have to kind of pay attention to all of the like alliances and world building and politics. But I can't even describe other than saying that this series was the most fun and the best reading experience that I have had to date. And maybe it's because I grew up playing Skyrim and I have just like a preconceived just love for things like this. But I also know that John Gwynne's writing and his characters are some of my favorites ever. I knew on page 26 of this book last year that I was going to love this one. And that love just continued to all 3 more of this series. And now it's an obsession. I don't know what else to tell you, but this whole book series is amazing. It is my favorite. It's my favorite book series series ever and my favorite 3 books of 2023. Throughout all 3 of these books, I feel like the pacing was perfect. Each sequel picks up exactly where the last book left off. So it's really just one continuous timeline, which was really nice to read. And it really did feel like every single character, every single scene and plot point had a purpose. And that's really saying something because these books are really big. So a lot happens. And it's so good. It's just so good. All right. These are my favorite books of 2023. This is the #1 spot. I don't think I could choose a single one of them if I had to. So I'm just simply not going to. And this is the answer. So that's it. 2023 is over. I ended up reading 100 books this year, which is really exciting. And out of all of them, these are the ones that stood out to me. I would love to know down below in the comments if you also read any of these books and loved them. And while you're down there, leave me the crossed sword emoji. And don't forget to subscribe and like the video. I always appreciate your support. And of course, be kind to one another and happy reading. Bye.